The Future of CDFIs is a project that we started in January to support CDFI practitioners who are facing big strategic issues. We offer this monthly Zoom event for free, or this webinar, to share a wide range of perspectives and ideas that we hope is helping you and your colleagues assess the issues for yourselves. Today, we're hosting a timely and important conversation on consolidation in the CDFI industry, risks and rewards. At a fluid and uncertain time in the CDFI industry, as in past uncertain times, more CDFI leaders are asking questions. Is my CDFI's business model sustainable? Does uncertainty at the CDFI fund make it less sustainable? What sort of consolidation models are we talking about? Mergers, acquisitions, shared services, or something else? What would it mean to my CDFI to merge with another CDFI, or to acquire one, or to be acquired? And is this a good time to explore consolidation? We are very fortunate to have three speakers today who are uniquely qualified to inform this discussion. They will help you get started thinking about the risks and rewards of CDFI consolidation, or if you're already thinking about it, what a roadmap for you might look like. Marla Bilonick is President and CEO of NALCAB, the National Association of Latino Community Asset Builders, a national network of Latino-serving CDFIs and nonprofit lenders advancing small business growth, affordable housing, and economic mobility. Doug Raymond is a senior partner specializing in corporate governance and mergers and acquisitions at Faegre Drinker, Biddle, and Reith, and he's a longtime counsel to CDFIs and other nonprofits. Sara Razavi is the CEO of Working Solutions CDFI, a small business lender serving California, and as of yesterday, as some of you may have seen, she's also CEO of Main Street Launch. Bree Rose is posting links in the chat to their online bios, so you can find out more about them if you'd like to. All three speakers have real-world experience with CDFI consolidation, as they will tell you. Our program today will run for 90 minutes to allow for thorough presentations, for audience questions, and panel discussion. Each panelist will aim to speak for about 15 minutes. And as Bree mentioned, please post your questions in the chat, preceded by the letter Q to help us manage the flow of the conversation. One more detail before we get into the discussion. Following this Zoom event, we are trying something new, offering small group discussions next week for people who want to explore the topic in depth with peers. We're limiting the size overall of the gathering to 100 people that we will break into 4 or 5 discussion groups to keep the discussion engaging and accessible, depending on the level of interest. We're fortunate that several leading CDFI industry consultants have volunteered to facilitate your conversations. And after our panelists speak today and before the Q&A discussion, we're going to share a link that you can use to sign up for the small group discussions, which will take place on March 20th. And finally, to get to the substance of the matter, I want to start with a little historical context. Consolidation in the CDFI industry is not new. Strategically, in fact, CDFI industry consolidation has been a debate and a discussion going back almost as far as the CDFI industry itself. And the more I talk to CDFI industry leaders, the more I learn about past acquisitions that I didn't know about and mergers that I hadn't heard about, generally on a small scale, as well as ideas about future consolidation. Of course, we have seen mergers on a large scale. Most visible among loan funds was the creation of Momentus, bringing together CDC Small Business in San Diego and Capital Impact Partners, which was headquartered in DC. And in the world of CDFI depositories, mergers and acquisitions are relatively common. Consolidation was also integral to OFN's 2003 strategy that came to be known as Grow, Change, or Die. And in full disclosure, I led OFN in 2003 when we came out with that strategy. But here's what OFN said in 2003. The current system delivering financing is to economically underserved people and communities is nearing the end of its useful life. The current system comprises independent, vertically integrated financial intermediaries. It excels in providing customized financial and technical solutions to diverse community development customers. It falls short on providing products and services at a scale proportionate to market demand and need, in large part due to operational inefficiencies and the limited operational interdependence of CDFIs and their financial partners. Bringing that language back raises questions that many CDFIs are asking today. Does consolidation lead to greater impact or greater scale? And can mergers, acquisitions, and shared services strategies be proactive, offensive steps against the growing economic inequity and injustice in the United States. As with all of the topics we spotlight in the future of CDFIs, consolidation in the CDFI industry holds different meanings for each of you. What matters most to me and to CDFI Friendly America is that it is an important topic on many minds that has systemic consequences and that will affect all of us. So, to get us started today, we want to ask you a couple of questions to better understand why you joined us today. Please take about 30 seconds to answer the two survey questions that Bree is going to share on the screen. We'll take a look at them together, the results together, then we'll get to our program. Bree?
It's actually been up as people are joining. So we
Oh,
already have 169
oh,
respondents. Thank
how do you
you.
like that? I had hit the screen. Are they still coming in or are we done there?
Yeah, they're still trickling in. Let's just give it one more moment. Try to hear from as many of you as possible.
How are we doing?
I think we can wrap it up.
All right.
I'm going to share the results in just 1 second. Can everyone see that? Can I get a nod? Thank you.
Great. So overwhelming interest in understanding how it's going to change might change the CDFI sector. And strong sentiment, I think that CDFIs need to look at all options and that people are coming here open-minded, want to learn more, and hopefully we'll be able to provide lots of useful information for folks coming out of this and following up on this. So thanks, Bree. We can take that down. So I want to once again just thank all three of our speakers today. They are extraordinary resources who have volunteered their expertise and their experience and their time and their ideas. And let's get started. We'll begin with Marla, then Doug, and then Sara. Marla.
Thank you so much, Mark. I'm going to share my screen here. Bear with me. All right. Thank you so much. So today I'm going to be speaking about two experiences with acquisition of nonprofits that I led in my previous role at the Latino Economic Development Center, otherwise known as LEDC. Again, I am now, as Mark mentioned, almost 5 years into my tenure at NALCAB, but I still reflect on these experiences and I'm hopeful that they will be valuable to you. So the two acquisitions that I'll be speaking to are one that occurred in 2017, which was the acquisition of a nonprofit called Empowered Women International. The second took place just a year later and was announced at the beginning of the following year, of a housing counseling agency called Arlington Homeownership Made Easy. The reason why we took this on, we had expanded, the organization is based in Washington, D.C. We had expanded to suburban Maryland in sort of a more traditional way, which took probably a total of 6 years to fully sort of install between Montgomery County, Maryland and Baltimore, Maryland. And as we looked to Northern Virginia, which is the equivalent in Virginia, we thought there might be a better way. And I won't say that this was our vantage point from the outset, but as we did it one time, we thought, let's do this again and complete our suite of services. So the first organization, Empowered Women International, and I want to clarify too that both of these were adding complementary organizations onto an existing CDFI versus two CDFIs consolidating, which is what Sara will be speaking to. So the first one was spurred by the loss of the founding executive director. She was a dynamic, amazing woman. And I think the board there sort of felt like we won't be able to find someone to replace this incredible woman. And so let's see if we can fold this organization into another, perhaps larger, more stable organization. And so I found this interesting. It's a very unusual way that it came about. The board of directors of EWI put out a competitive process for interested acquirers that would be interested in absorbing this organization into their business model. And so we participated in that. We were clearly victorious in that effort. What was useful about it, it was complementary to LEDC's existing suite of services. But we didn't have any gender-focused programming. And so sort of overnight with the acquisition of this organization, we all of a sudden had women-focused programming that we could leverage for our existing customers, could leverage for acquiring additional funding. It just made a lot of sense at the time. They also were headquartered in Northern Virginia, so we immediately had an office location in Northern Virginia by way of absorbing this organization. They did not have any in Spanish programming, so it actually also expanded their reach by adding our staff capacity to provide and deliver services in Spanish. Just a note, when we acquired them, they had already been in existence for 15 years with a focus of training female entrepreneurs, particularly immigrant entrepreneurs. The second organization was Arlington Homeownership Made Easy, otherwise known as AHOME. That one was actually spurred by threats to the organization's sustainability. They were experiencing some financial instability. The idea actually came to me from a third organization that suggested I reach out because they may be having some challenges. When I did, the CEO at the time was not interested in consolidation, and so we sort of socialized the idea over the course of a year plus. At which point she actually came back and said, that conversation we had about a year ago, I'm ready to talk. And so we, took it from there. They actually were providing identical HUD certified housing services that LADC already provided, but also were headquartered in Northern Virginia. They also, beyond having a part-time Spanish speaker on staff, did not have curriculum or materials in Spanish. And so that was something that we were bringing to bear for them. And I'll add in this case, in particular, I think for their CEO, while it was kind of a longer path to acceptance, I think in the end, she was so thrilled and happy to just be able to focus on programming and have all of the back office transfer over to LADC, whether that be HR, finance, sort of all of these elements that weren't why she came into this field to begin with, were no longer on her plate, and she could just focus on the programming, which was her calling. A couple of reflections. I think the most challenging aspects that we had, having not done it before, the legal process is a high barrier to entry. It's very complicated. Doug will explain, and I'm sure Sara as well will touch on how particular of a process it is. And like many of us who have applied for federal funding or done, other sort of high barrier to entry tasks, it's sort of once you've done it once, it's a little bit easier the next time, but it's by no means easy any way you slice it. There's so many aspects, legal, personnel-wise, otherwise. It's just an extremely complicated process. I think also it's a long road to obtaining full transparency from a financial point of view when you're in discussions with an organization, particularly before you're sure you're going to move forward, which is actually the most critical time to have that full financial transparency. So you have to sort of build trust very quickly to have the partner organization really lay it all out on the table, skeletons and all, so that you can go into this decision with full information. And that's not to say that they have to have a perfect financial position, but you just need to go into the marriage, so to speak, knowing everything that you're sort of getting yourself into. I think another challenge, not that we didn't necessarily anticipate, but just the people aspect is extremely demanding, both from both organizations' point of view. For the organizations that's being acquired, I would say they likely have a more vulnerable position, just a little bit more uncertainty of what this means for them. And ultimately, as I say, sort of in the next section, that's what it boils down to is I think from a staff point of view, it's really, what does this mean for me? Do I get to still sit at the same desk? Do I still get to do the same work that I always have done and want to continue doing? Do I have to, learn how to ride a unicycle when I've been used to riding a bicycle? It's just a very personal for each staffer. The change management aspect, I think, was really challenging, just again, linked back to people, but just sort of bringing people along, providing as much information as possible whenever it was possible, but it didn't necessarily always flow at the speed or consistency that folks wanted. Contracts do not all necessarily convey, and that was something that we didn't necessarily anticipate. We sort of felt like we're getting the whole package and bringing it over. We had to go through a whole campaign with every single funder to explain, why are we doing this? Why does it make sense? How is this a positive development for you? Two things that I would say are big takeaways from that, across all funders, private, public, what have you. For some, if it's a funder that you don't have a relationship with already, they don't necessarily buy it hook, line, and sinker. And we did have cases where both cases happened to be Virginia government contracts. They sort of said, like, we don't know you from Adam, and like, sorry, but this doesn't come along with that organization. Like, the contract is over once you're together, and you can apply again separately as your new entity, but this isn't sort of like a done deal just because you're acquiring our organization that we adore. We don't know you. Um, and the other thing too is that 1+1 does not necessarily equal two. So if you're going to a funder who funds both organizations, they likely will not fund you at the full level of your grant plus the other organization's grant. They're going to fund you at something different, that hopefully is not significantly less. But that's just another thing to keep in mind, is that it's not necessarily a one-for-one translation. Again, I mentioned communication, who needs to know what and when. Your board needs to be involved, your staff, your external stakeholders. All of those audiences have sort of a different timeline and a different need to know, and that's a lot to manage. So just something to keep in mind. And then just the leap of faith. This is a leap of faith. Just, if I want to use the analogy of marriage, which I'm personally not that great at, but it is a leap of faith. You have to, be ready to just kind of assume the best and take that leap and hope it works out. So even with all the information and all the planning, it is still a leap of faith. Some unexpected things. I think a lot of times you think of the outsized influence of the larger organization if you're talking about an acquisition, but there are positive influences that can come from the new staff that are being folded in, different traditions that they might bring to bear, different attitudes, organizational culture. I think, there is something to be said for how a fresh set of eyes can impact an organization. And so that influence of the new staff is very positive. As I mentioned, it was unexpected, but the contracts do not all necessarily convey. I think the skepticism and discomfort of staff at both organizations, again, as I mentioned, I didn't necessarily anticipate how challenging that would be. And then the length of time of each transaction, which was over 1 year in both cases. Another unexpected positive, the pro bono resources that were offered up, both of these, I'll give a shout out to Morgan Lewis, which was the law firm that did it, both of those transactions pro bono. I don't know if they're still doing that. So, if you knock on their door, don't necessarily tell them that I sent you, but they were fantastic and 100% free service. Also, Capital One, before they had their formal pro bono service, which they currently are offering, did give us a change management consultant, which was so amazing and so great, and something that we would not have taken on ourselves from the cost point of view. So that was fantastic. And Mark, let me know if I'm doing okay on time. I'm trying to watch the clock here as well.
I was about to give you a 5 minute
Okay.
update. So 5 minutes left.
Okay, I got it. So EWI, so I wanted to just give some perspective because these are transactions that happened quite a while ago. So 9 and 8 years respectively, where are these organizations and their work? So for EWI, you'll see on the left, their branding was maintained. It was sort of melded with LADC's branding. So you can see their new-ish logo there. Their programming was sustained and grew. It's actually, kind of gone gangbusters versus, how it was more contained before. One person still remains on staff from that organization. I would say sort of in both of these cases, there was one core staff person that stayed on, and then the rest, whether it was outsourced consultants or other staff, it ended up in both cases that it sort of was infilled with LADC in-house staff, but those sort of one core on each side stayed. The interim ED from EWI did not stay on. She departed. No board members from EWI transitioned over. The office lease was terminated, and we moved everyone in Northern Virginia over to the AHOME office. We did retain some contracts, and the branding, as I mentioned, was retained. For AHOME, again, similar, like programming grew because it was going into a whole new audience of Spanish speakers. Their former AD remains on staff 8 years later. None of her staff transitioned over. One board member transitioned over, but has since termed off. And that was something, I'll just say candidly, was a bit challenging. It wasn't really a fit with our board necessarily. And so that's another thing to keep in mind, is that typically EWI was not the norm. Typically, board members from one of the organizations want to fold in to the new sort of head parent organization. And their office brought on the EWI team. Some of the contracts were retained, and we dissolved their branding altogether, and they were just folded into our programming. So I will end with a shameless plug that NALCAB is actually offering support for organizations that are considering consolidation as a strategy for growth and or for organizational sustainability. We have a toolkit that has a step-by-step checklist, very high level, like sort of these are all the steps in the order that we have available, as well as technical assistance and access to grant and loan funding from NALCAB. It is confidential in nature. I'm shouting out Jeremy Carter, who is on this call, and his email. And I know that you all will get the slides after this presentation, so you'll have that email there if you don't have a chance to jot it down. And big ups to TD Bank, who is funding this initiative at NALCAB. Did I do it, Mark?
That's awesome, Marla. Thank you so
Right.
much. It's
you.
great to get a little perspective, and we have a little time perspective on that because these were things that happened almost a decade ago, right? And we get this.
Absolutely.
We're in a different environment now. We'll hear a little bit more from Sara in a second, but let's turn to Doug Raymond, who I've known for 30 plus years and has been a great resource to the CDFI industry for many, many years. Doug.
Good morning, good afternoon. Do you see the screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so let me try to move something here. Bear with me 1 second. Okay, so I'm a corporate lawyer in Philadelphia and have practiced M&A law for 40 years now. And though my primary focus has been on for-profit entities, I've done an awful lot with CDFIs and other nonprofits. Though M&A is a primary driver of change in the for-profit world, with something like 38,000 transactions globally last year, it's not nearly as prevalent in the not-for-profit space, excluding healthcare, which is an outlier for reasons that we can discuss. In my experience, there are two main factors that are responsible for this difference. First, the board, who typically are not paid, is not focused on the issues that drive M&A. And they typically, and they will frequently defer to management. Second, management typically does not want to do M&A. Now, not to get sidetracked by it, but in the conventional for-profit world, they're owners and they're in the business frequently to make money. There are other reasons, obviously, that animate somebody who starts or operates or owns a business, but a financial return is a very important part of that. And they are the ones typically who keep their eye on the ball around financial returns. And when circumstances change so that it's no longer appropriate, they want to cash out. The directors are typically paid. They owe fiduciary obligations to the owners, so they tend to pay attention to the sorts of things the owners pay attention to. Third, the management may not be interested particularly in a buyout transaction. I'm now talking primarily about what I'll refer to in this conversation as the target, but it's also the acquiring entity, because there's often a reason that managers may be reluctant to move into M&A transactions are, first, frequently people lose their employment. And second, and I think Marla sort of adverted to this a little bit, people may be concerned or hesitant or suspicious of what the combined entity will look like. Will it continue to do and have the culture that the separate entities wanted? Those motivations exist in the for-profit world as well as the not-for-profit world, but in the for-profit world, management gets paid if there's a buyout. And so they are usually willing to come along. So it's interesting that of the two consolidations that Marla discussed, one of them was triggered by the unfortunate loss of the CEO of one of the parties, which eliminated that, that management resistance. And okay, so the slide up here sort of just highlights a little bit the distinctions between the for-profit and not-for-profit M&A worlds. It's interesting that the second consolidation that Marla highlighted is, in my experience, the typical motivation for a consolidation or an acquisition transaction, which is that one of the entities gets in financial distress. And either the executive director or the board or as frequently a funder says, you have to find a partner. And so it's kind of a combination of necessity. And those frequently are not good transactions when the parties are sort of doing it because they have to, not because they want to. All that being said, the CDFI industry, I think, is well suited for consolidation, or as my colleagues and friends in the PE world would say, for a roll-up. There are a lot of CDFIs. There are a lot of them. And a lot of the CDFIs, and in addition to CDFIs, and there may be a number of people on this call, there are sort of ancillary enterprises, either for-profit or not-for-profit businesses that are related to or supporting or consulting with CDFIs who are also highly fragmented. A lot of these entities, not all of them clearly, but a lot of these entities are small. And as a result, their operating expenses chew up a lot of their available source of capital. And that reduces not only the percentage of their capital and their funds that they can use for the mission, but it means that it's a relatively inefficient structure. If they were 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times the size with lower margin for their operating expenses, they would also potentially be able to attract funders who would be more interested in putting 95% of their money to work in outbound loans or whatever it would be, rather than in covering overhead expenses. Also, in the industry, it appears to me anyway that while there in many areas there's local competition among CDFIs, it seems to me that this competition is as frequently for funding as for customers and borrowers of the CDFIs. There's and part of the reason for these conversations is there's an unquenchable, an infinite need almost for the loans from the CDFI industry. And it's not a situation where you would say it's overbanked and we have too many. There's not enough competition. There's plenty of room for more loans if there was more capital. And another factor, which, again, I don't have the data, this is more anecdotal, but it seems to me that in many of the CDFIs I've been involved with, either local or regional, and I guess in some cases national, the funding community appears to be relatively narrow, and in some cases, the same entity is funding multiple CDFIs, which creates an opportunity, and I think Marla spoke to this as well, to go to that lender and say, would you like, or that funder, would you, like to get a more effective use of your funding, and more bang for your buck by leveraging 2 or 3 or 4 organizations into one, and then being more effective and more efficient. And then without getting too much in the weeds on this, I think it's clear that the industry is undercapitalized. There's little opportunity for organic growth. The industry does not, have a 30% return on investment, so that every time you make a loan, you get a bunch more. You make net income that you can add and make new loans. It's sort of a zero-sum game with that. So it's hard for the industry to have. I mean, that's not entirely true, but it's hard for the industry to have significant organic growth. And the existence of the federal regulatory structure to the CDFI industry does, I think, limit the entrance into the market, at least to some extent. And I don't think we've seen a lot of for-profit organizations wanting to come into this space right now.
Doug, about 4 or 5 minutes.
All right, well, here we go.
We're good.
So the conditions to a successful combination is you need somebody to drive the process. And as I say, in the for-profit world, those drivers are pretty obvious. In the CDFI world, you either need to have the board, a funder, or the CEO, executive director say, we are going to drive this process. And they need to go through a process. If you're doing it other than, oh my goodness, we're out of cash, we need an emergency lifeline. You need to identify what the strategy is for a combination. You need to identify institutions that have a similar culture where there would be buy-in from both teams. You need to understand, again, as Marla was speaking to, what the transaction costs would be in terms of structuring and funding a transaction. You need to identify somebody who's willing to fund the transaction itself, as well as the entity after the transaction were to close. The structure of a typical M&A process for a nonprofit like a CDFI would be to first identify what's your strategy. Is it a regional strategy? Is it type of borrower? Is it some type of loan, energy related or what have you? Identify what are the red flags that you want to avoid, what are the green flags that you want to move to, and then make a list of who might be potential partners. And then you need to think about transaction structure. You need to think about consent. And Marla spoke about, was surprised a little bit that not all of the contracts came along. Some of the funders might say, well, that's good for you, but not for me. That may be true with people who've given you grants, may be true with other funders. It's not unusual for a not-for-profit entity to require state attorney general approval of a transaction, which often is an easy thing to get, but it can be a problem if you forget to do it. But the main issue, I think, is identifying somebody who's willing to champion the M&A process, and then identifying potential targets that would be compatible in terms of culture, mission, and a strategy for approaching that mission. And through that process, it really takes a dedicated team that's willing to do more than just devote occasional time once a year to a conversation about maybe we should do an M&A. It requires an organized process and probably advisors who are experienced in this space of M&A in the not-for-profit CDFI space. And with that, I will bring it to a close.
Thank you, Doug. You prompted a bunch of questions. We'll come back to them a little bit later. You might want to take a look in the chat to see what people are asking. But let's turn now to Sara Razavi from Working Solutions and Main Street Launch. What's going on, Sara?
Thank you. All's well. Yes, thank you, Mark, for the introduction, and thank you to my fellow panelists. As you know, all of them have already said, Mark, Doug, and Marla have already indicated that this idea is neither new generally, nor across sectors, across industries, including CDFIs. Doug outlined some great points, and Marla's experience touches on some of the wins and issues as well. And yes, to both of their experiences, this does happen, right? And I'm very excited about our partnership of shared leadership across Working Solutions and Main Street Launch, two like-sized small business CDFIs serving California who have different product offerings, but similar enough to make an exchange of leadership very plausible. We are not merged. We are presently sharing executives. It may not end there, but this structure makes sense for us at this time because we remain two separate entities. We are retaining branding, and that's why you see both of our logos behind me, and we will be holding our separate EINs, holding our respective offices, our headcounts, our separate boards. I can speak more about this structure during discussion, but just consider this, and Doug touched on this. Staff is likely your highest expense, or definitely your top three, and leadership are likely the larger portion of that. If you can spread that, that's going to help your bottom line and allow you to invest in other deferred expenses. So for today, what I'm really wondering about, and for those of you who know me, I've been wondering about this for a long time. I've spoken on panels, co-authored papers, and now implementing the first of hopefully several such partnerships. I'm wondering, why doesn't this happen more often? Why is this not seen as a growth strategy, as it is in many industries? Why isn't it seen as a way to build your business? Instead, it's seen as a defeat. And alternatively, if it is seen as a win of some sort of empire building, and it's ultimately not encouraged. But what if we change the paradigm? What if, just as we've democratized finance, we consider democratizing ambition to do good and think of scale not only as positive, but a necessity? Let's let go of the idea that scale is bad, that achieving scale equates to losing mission, that doing more with less is par for the course and of this work, and delude ourselves that this is sustainable. Just even saying that, right, that this is sustainable makes no sense to me because it doesn't make sense. And we end up doing crazy things. We move into scarcity mindset of not what we could do, but what we can do in the moment given the constraints. The difference is between reactive thinking versus proactive future thinking. Can we go to the next slide, please? So let's consider changing the paradigm. Scale is good. Scale and mission are not mutually exclusive. Scale doesn't have to mean breadth and not depth. Because again, the alternative, doing more with less, is not sustainable. Consolidation is a growth strategy. It is not a reactive strategy. I believe that just as community finance has expanded the imagination of investors and clients about what can be done with finance when it's focused on communities versus corporations, so too, when done well, strategic partnerships, including consolidation, but not limited to it, can be a great tool for impact. Again, consolidation is growth strategy. It is not without its risks, but I and many folks believe those risks are worth it because they try to be a proactive tactic. And even if that path ends up being very hard, or even not as fruitful as you'd hoped, at least you tried something. At least you are dealing with this, you're no longer trying to deal with the same issues you've dealt with for the long time, which is around sustainability, which is around talent retention, capitalization, investing in appropriate tools, etc. This strategy is about working together, not alone, but collectively to enhance operational capacity, extend collective reach, and offer a model for amplified impact in the industry. I hope we can build the infrastructure, the scale, the resilience needed to do our work better, to reach our communities, and to ensure sustainability over the long term. And this matters now more than ever. Next slide, please. Why? Because the need is great. Here's a sample of what Working Solutions highlighted in our current 5-year plan. I've seen versions of this in all of your plans. It's naming that there is a growing need for our work. And for us at Working Solutions, we named consolidation as a path towards sustaining good work and impact. Next slide, please. So we baked it into our strategic plan. There it is. Those are all of our goals. The highlighted one says that for sustainability, we are going to look at consolidation as a growth strategy. Our path, like many CDFIs, we started very small. We were one person, one city. It was not me. I'm very grateful to our founder, Emily Gassner. But we have since grown to 24 people at Working Solutions and now 14 people at Main Street. And even that will not be enough to serve the state, right? So this is not a one and done. It cannot possibly be. We're actively looking for more partners. Next slide, please. Because as Doug touched on, look, there are multiple strategies for growth. These are called organic strategies. Ultimately, we knew that these strategies have their limits, because you either build your products or you find new markets. Those are the two axes. And whatever you don't do, you figure out how to get. So next slide, please. We followed the build, buy, partner framework. This framework, whatever you're thinking, gives you the consideration that you either A, focus on the building of it, or B, you source it. And if you source it, and that's the right side of the graph, most of the time, if you source it, you're either doing it through partnership because you have an urgency, but it's maybe less of a priority. Excuse me, it's a high priority, but less of an urgency, or you buy it. And that buy, I want to clarify, doesn't have to be a monetary exchange, which it is in the for-profit space, but it can be an exchange of resources, services, including talent and skills of another who has something you want, and together you can balance each other out. Next slide, please. So let's get to the how. We've talked about the why. So this is our strategy. We sought expertise. We hired a consultancy to help us figure out how we can do this. That's Envision. This graph is from them. We read guidebooks. We studied case examples in both the industry and across the outside of the industry. And we didn't believe we needed to build this ourselves. We knew there were experts out there, so we reached out to them. And they introduced us to this 5 phases of consolidation or merger planning. Since then, I've seen different versions of this, but the idea is the same, that you can't rush this decision. And Marla touched on it, so did Doug, because this will not be easy. The phases are there for you to see. You'll get this deck later. My goal isn't to go through these phases, just to note that they do build on each other. And to have something as a growth strategy, you have to be able to consider how you'd replicate the process and figure out these phases. Figuring out these phases helps you do that. And as Marla said, not every deal, I think Doug also said it, each deal is going to have its own considerations and its own hurdles. But if you've thought through what your intent is, how you're identifying people, what your exploration process is going to be like, those 3 phases are going to move a lot faster for you, because goodness knows, implementation and integration are going to be work. And as one of our board members recently said, and we've spent over a year just getting to implementation now, they said, and now you're ready for the marathon, right? Because that was just preparing. Now we're entering the marathon. So, all right, next slide, please. There are, therefore, and I've addressed this a couple of times, there are multiple paths towards partnership. This is the collaboration map from the premier nonprofit consultancy, La Piana Consulting, who has been doing nonprofit mergers and acquisitions for a very long time. You'll see the outside circle is collaborations. This could include joint advocacy, networks, and the further you come in, the more control you have between you and the partner. The farther you are, the less control you might have. There's strategic alliances, that's the blue section. And finally, in the middle, there are strategic restructuring. Within that are joint ventures, parent subsidiary groups, corporate mergers or acquisitions. In this final group, joint ventures, parent subsidiary, mergers and acquisitions, you will see changes to corporate control and or structure, including the creation or dissolution of one or more organizations. The corporate integration discussion, however, the question about joint ventures, parent subsidiary, all of this, because it changes corporate control and structure, this is a board level decision. This is governance. And I loved what Doug was talking about this. We can go over the differences in for-profit and nonprofit mergers, and it does come down to boards and decision makers, right? It is a bigger piece of the consideration and why all the reasons Doug talked about, what's the motivation, who holds the information, who forgoes the decision-making, even though it's technically under their purview. For all these reasons, and that most boards are volunteer, it's very hard to move boards unless there's an emergency. So extra kudos to those board members who are on this call today, who are watching this, because just thinking and talking about this proactively is going to do wonders for you. All right, let's move on. The next slide, please. So I hope you now know maybe why there's a lot of talk, but this isn't happening that much. Yes, there's lack of awareness, but I want to be crystal clear. It's not that people don't know about mergers and acquisitions. It's just maybe that they have limited bandwidth and capacity to think through what that could look like in their organization. They're putting out fires rather than future-proofing their organization, which leads to a lack of urgency, again, until there's an emergency, right? And that's often too late, maybe not too late for the deal, but certainly too late to affect the success rate. It's going to undermine your success if you're being reactive. The second piece is under or overestimating the complexity and resources needed. Marla touched on this. I loved her list of what are all the expertise you're going to need, because you're going to have to really lean on consultants. You might have some of this in-house, but my goodness, that legal piece is a bear. It's a barrier. And we all do lean on pro bono, and we're so grateful at Working Solutions for our pro bono partners. They've been with us for as long as our organization has been around. They know us. And even then, it's taken so much time and energy to coordinate because we are balancing not just the nonprofit piece, but the lender piece. And that's a complex offering. And finally, ineffective or underplanned implementation. Again, both of them touched on this. This sours the experience for some, and they're the ones you might be talking to. And so, let's be really clear. This is a hard strategy, but it is doable. And there are talented entities devoted to design thinking, to change management, as Marla talked about, and integrating data and systems who can improve this process for you. Again, during just the many years that I've been talking about this, I can already see that some of this is changing. There is awareness. Look at just how many people are on this call and how many folks are talking about this in the industry. But people, when we got to get boards here, before you bring a candidate for partnership, you've got to be really making sure that your board understands why this is important, because it can be expensive, in time definitely, and as I mentioned already, the legal piece. So you best have the support and backing of your board. And this path can be normalized. It can be supported by experts and tools to ease the way. Let's go on to the next slide, because here's the potential gains, right? You can have protected growth, which can deliver impact and sustainability versus opportunistic growth, which may feel responsive, but may be hard to maintain and ever-changing, where you can finally make investments in your deferred costs, like right-sizing salaries, getting the right tools for the job, investing in more headcount with specialized offerings to the team. So that gets to the next point, the team. Talent, your talent can step into the things they love, or at least start solving some new problems, for goodness sake, right? Because this becomes a retention and recruitment strategy. And finally, depending on the structure of the deal, the assets, and these could be capital, especially net assets, or talent or talent, can be transferred thoughtfully to a social impact organization to carry forward the work rather than return to the funder or investor or just lost, because otherwise whatever any organization has raised and not spent, has developed and not nurtured, will be lost. Consider that, I hope, when you're thinking about your legacy. Next slide, please. So here are the potential real risks. The failure to respond to the scale of need, the failure to sustain what you've built, the under-leveraging of assets, and I'm talking both balance sheet and talent, which leads to burnout, both of your capital and of your talent. Let's move on. These are the perceived risks. We've already covered them. A lot of people think the reason this isn't happening is because of lack of awareness, because of underestimated complexity of the resources, the legal considerations, the compliance considerations. These all require a great deal of expertise, and you either have them in-house or you have to source them. And I am so grateful. I am so grateful to our board, the Working Solutions Board, the Main Street Board, and our executive team, the Working Solutions executive team and the Main Street executive team. Whether they were running the shop and making sure loans were closed, or we were represented at events, or bills were paid on time, our funds were being raised, anything and everything that kept the ship going, while the rest of us who were designated for this thinking could chart the course of what's ahead. This ineffective and underplanned implementation, this sours the experience for so many people, but again, it doesn't have to. And here's something that I didn't put on the slide. The unsaid things that create the risk. The egos, not just of the CEOs, not just of the executives, of the boards, of the staff, and as we've already touched on, of the funders and investors. That nonprofits are held to this high standard, the same standard, frankly, as larger public companies who have way more resources to balance the activity that's required for this strategy. And because of both those things, the roller coaster ride of whether people are going to keep coming with you, whether the funders are going to stay and remain, have confidence. And I'm going to be very clear, many funders say they will, and they might even plan to. But ultimately, 1 + 1 does not provide a 2x. 1x and 2x does not lead to 2x. And you have to really be ready. Part of the reason this is a growth strategy is because you're diversifying your revenue. You're hoping that your earned income is going to do better. You're hoping that your expenses are going to be spread better. You're hoping that this opens up new opportunities for contracts and larger funders, because not everyone's going to come along. There will be a chilling effect. Funders will exit and some staff will exit. It is it is part of the deal. So it's not whether these are risks. It's that they are hard. And there's a difference between that. Let's move on to the next slide. I urge you again to think about changing the paradigm. If the goal is to create stronger, more responsive institutions with stronger infrastructures and resilience needed to do our work better, to reach more populations and to ensure sustainability over the long run, then consolidation can be a great growth strategy. It does not need to be a bailout for a failing organization or leadership. It is and can be a proactive way for healthy CDFIs to combine strengths, reduce redundancies, and tackle larger challenges together. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Sara. We've gotten a great overview of consolidation questions and issues and challenges in the field today. I know we're going to lose some people at the top of the hour. I want to really quickly put up the link for anyone who's interested in signing up for a small group discussion. So Bree Rose, if you would put that up, that would be great. Or are you going to post it? There
It's
we
in
go.
the chat.
It's in the chat. Thank you. That was a good idea. So anybody who's interested in signing up, take that with you. And if there are other people you want to involve as well, it's an experiment. We'll see what happens. Let's see hopefully people are able to stay we planned this for 90 minutes. Hopefully people are able to stay. We've had 3 great, rich presentations. And I want to start with the most concrete question we got, I think, which was, what does it cost to do this? What are the fees? How do you budget for this? How do you plan for this? What do you expect? And let me ask Sara and Marla to answer that, and then Doug, give us some perspective from how you think about cost or how you've come across cost, and has that been a barrier for folks?
Marla, you want to go
Marla?
first?
I can just say, the cost, I think the largest cost in our case when I was at LADC was the staff time, which I don't know that we ever quantified at the end of the day, but it was a second full-time job for everybody involved. And that typically was myself, our CFO. Those are probably the most intensely engaged individuals. But I really liked what you said, Sara, about using this as a way to engage your board. And I do think that a lot of pro bono support could come from those board relationships or from their own expertise. And I know boards are sort of always looking for how they can plug in and be useful. And I think this would be like a prime example. Legal, I would imagine, would be a super high cost, but in both of our cases, it was offered pro bono, so that was defrayed. And then I think some of these more refined, certainly La Piana and if you were to engage a change management consultant, those are, come with a hefty price tag. But I do want to do a back of the envelope of like sort of what exactly this costs from a dollar point of view.
Yeah, it's the staff time for sure, and certainly some distinct functions are going to be pulled in more and at an earlier point, like the CFO and CEO. And frankly, part of the cost is many CDFIs of a certain size actually surprisingly don't have CFOs. And so, you're really leaning on even more expertise and support in that way to have a strategic thought partner around your financial future. And then there's also the opportunity cost. You have to focus on this at the cost of something else, but that's anytime you're creating a strategy. And so you really probably can't go down some other path because you're hyper-focused on this. With all, you get what you pay for sometimes with free or pro bono. So that too, you have to think through what is meaningful for you. Our organization, again, was so fortunate to work with a council who knows the organization for many, many years. So build that. If you have any kind of growth plan, I hope you're leaning into creating a partnership, a relationship with the legal counsel or legal advice from your board members, because as you grow, you're going to need that more and more. And then, of course, the costs of just the staff culture that you're trying to build. The many events, the many opportunities you want to bring people together. So this does not have barriers. And when I pointed out the 5 phases, there are maybe 2 or 3 of them that funders explicitly fund. And I have to be really clear, they underfund it. They don't fund it at the level that you need the support. But again, the more general dollars you have, this is a path towards thinking about how you're going to sustain. And it really, as Doug mentioned, has to have some drivers, and those drivers have to just be ready for the opportunity costs that this is going to provide.
Right. I agree with all that. I would add, sort of as a follow-up, Sara, to your point, one of the costs, and we talked earlier about the importance of trying to align culture in a consolidation. But one of the unintended costs of a consolidation is the loss of staff who does not feel that alignment. It is inevitable, it seems, following a transaction that you will lose people who you did not want to lose. And the question is, do you lose too many people or can you manage that? That's a cost in addition to the staff time in sort of identifying and negotiating and affecting the transaction. We didn't really talk about the importance of investigation, what the lawyers call due diligence, into each party to sort of identify what are the issues that might get in the way of a transaction, whether it's a contingent liability or a major funder who's going to balk. Those are all significant costs. The dollars and cents cost, it's expensive if you have to pay for it. If you can find somebody, both a financial, an M&A advisor and a lawyer, lawyer who are willing to do it pro bono, that would be great. But again, you have to be careful, as Sara said. Sometimes you get what you pay for. But if you are doing a transaction at scale, at a larger transaction that you can absorb, that would support the costs that are being incurred, that makes it easier to do. So that would suggest to me that if you don't have access to sort of the pro bono assistance, that maybe thing to do is to have a larger organization consolidating up smaller organizations. Is a strategy that I've seen work in other places, but then you have to worry about, particularly about mission and culture and all those things as well.
Let me ask another question just to follow up to that, and I'll start with you, Doug, but we don't need to get in a lot of detail about this. Have you seen mergers, particularly in the nonprofit organizations you've worked with? Have you seen mergers or acquisitions that get stuck because of the cost and they just don't happen? So the mission gets lost, and Sara and Marla both referred to that risk in some ways. Things that don't happen because people get scared of the money, the cost. And then I'll ask Sara and Marla same question.
I'm sure there are,
Mhm.
but you often can find somebody who will do something on a pro bono basis, and it may not be done well. Like I mentioned, you may need to get the attorney general approval. I've seen a bunch of transactions where the lawyers papering the deal didn't know that and didn't get it. And then it raises questions down later on when, like, I was representing somebody who wanted to do a deal with those other guys.
Yeah.
So,
Marla,
but I'm sure that happens. I just haven't run into it myself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Marla.
I'll just add, in our case, and again, I want to give a shout out to Morgan Lewis, the firm that supported us. I actually found, I'm sure many people on this call use pro bono legal assistance, and it's typically like a one-off, like, please review this contract, or please, take a look at this scenario that we're going through. I thought the quality was very, very high, and it was individuals like yourself, Doug, who actually do M&A as their daily bread and butter. So they loved being able to bring that expertise rather than just kind of like a more general scanning of documents. So it ended up being great, but I do agree, sometimes you do get what you pay for, and if it's free, like, that's a risk.
Well, one of the potential things that CDFIs bring to these is CDFIs are not your typical nonprofit organization. They have interesting balance sheets, and there's a lot more flexibility and creativity. So that may be appealing to attorneys who you're asking to do pro bono work. Sara.
Yeah, I think the most important piece is because people underinvest in actual dollars and bringing on the experts that understand the process well. So you either have nonprofit consultancies who've never worked with CDFIs, or lending, those who've worked with lending institutions but never seen a nonprofit balance sheet. Because of that, your things are going to drag, and you might underinvest in who you bring to the table, which is why I'm really hopeful that there are industry intermediaries and coalitions like NALCAB who are investing in tools and trying to create pools of experts. But also, you should lean into those who have done this now a few times, not just for their thought partnership, but to bring to them an opportunity of what would it look like if we talk through this, because there are going to be plenty of naysayers. There are going to be plenty of folks who don't want to do this. That's fine. Stay in your lane, stay in your area. For those who are interested, let's perfect this. And I saw a note in the chat about this fear of what happened in the 90s and 2000s. I want to clarify, Working Solutions is a micro lending institution. And the reason we built our expertise on that product, because we really focused on keeping a single, simple product and expanding our market. When we were trying to identify our partner and partners, they had to either add to our continuum of capital so that we could be hyper-focused on what we were doing and not let that go, or they had to help us deepen our geography. Those are our considerations when we look at a partner. The next layer that we're looking at is there staffing synergy? Do they have, positions that they haven't filled or backfilled? Do we have positions that they could fit into? Because as I said, even with the Working Solutions and Main Street exchange that we presently have, at this size organization and trying to do what we're trying to do, there are still gaps in our leadership roles. There are still gaps in our staffing lanes, but we'll get there. And I just think, trying to think about being students of history. Adina, actually the late Adina, wonderful, who I spoke to about mergers and acquisitions, guided me very early on. And she said, Sara, when you're thinking about partners, try to stay in your asset class. Because when you begin to mix too much, culture is going to really be eroded. And you're going to also possibly lose one of your best, highest offerings in service of something else that's going to pull your attention. So for Working Solutions and Main Street, we are both small business lenders. In general, when we're thinking about partners, we're going to stay in that space. It's just a matter of the continuum rather than creating a whole new asset class, which will possibly pull us away from our mission.
Thanks. I want to pick up on a thread there, and it's come through a few other comments as well, which is my guess is that the most common reason you might lose staff, if you were, as Doug referenced, is because of some sense that you're leaving the community, or you're not staying as close to the community that people have come there to work with in some ways, right? That's a guess, but I know that's a big factor. So talk a little bit about how Marla, you went to a new state, right? I mean, what did that do to people? Sara, you're talking about, same state, but a lot of market that you haven't been in yet. So how do you get people comfortable with the idea your commitment to the community is no less than it was before, and maybe even greater? Marla.
Yeah, I didn't feel like the friction was as much around mission drift or mission loss as it was, or the challenge was sort of around redundancy. So to use the example of the interim executive director at EWI, once she came on board, it was sort of unclear what her role would be because there was an executive director of LEDC. And so, and then we had parallel staff in-house. So it was sort of like how to differentiate between, an incoming staffer to an existing staffer, and is it, creating duplication. So that was sort of our challenge. But I think it's a huge point of convincing for funders in particular, sort of how two missions can blend or amplify, I feel like that case is very hard to make conceptually, and obviously easier, but much longer time horizon to prove in practice. But I think there is like sort of this time period where it's conceptual and feels scary to where you can sort of earn that trust back and prove that you're actually going to, in both cases that I pointed out, for example, the missions grew, the reach grew to levels that they may not have ever grown independently. And so that to me is the best case. Like the programming sustained, it grew, it reached more people. That's what we all are trying to do for our organizations.
So, it's sort of proof by practice, right? I mean, you do it
which is difficult because it takes time.
Yeah. Sara, you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd just say one of the best ways to look at a challenge is just to name it, to recognize it. This is going to be difficult for staff. It's going to be difficult for the staff who are at the front end of it, at the planning. It's going to be difficult for the staff who are going to absorb the implementation. But for all of that, that's why this takes time. You have to give this time for the change management it requires and to build a ramp up rather than assuming that on day one, there's going to be all these cost savings and you're going to revamp all your solutions and revamp all your systems and suddenly have a much better bottom line. That's so unrealistic. And it's actually why people's heads spin and have really difficult, and I see it in the chat as well, where that's the stuff that it moved too fast or we didn't budget for it enough. You have to build that out. And frankly, in your assessment, assume that those cost savings aren't going to happen immediately. Where you're saving is on deferred costs, on not having a CFO, on not having strategy and strategists, on not having enough feet on the ground. You will realize the gains over time, but it's not going to be immediate. And so if you're looking for an immediate solution, this isn't it. And it's also, frankly, the same in for-profit. The reason there's this, this posture against for-profit mergers and acquisitions is a lot of people suddenly have to do things so differently than they did before that it's really confusing and it's very frustrating. And that's also part of staff retention. But if you build a ramp and just keep signposting that we know the North Star, but we don't totally know exactly how we're going to get there, that this is a collective effort, then hopefully people feel engaged and stick around to try to solve this problem with you.
Thank you. And sorry, there's a side question I want to ask, and I'm going to ask it now, and then I'm going to come back to Doug with a question about governance. But can you share when did you start having this conversation with Main Street Launch that led to the announcement yesterday of sort of a shared CEO?
Yeah, I can. And I want to preface this again. The 5 stages, the intent is the first stage, and you really have to plan this as a strategy. So I'm going to answer that, Mark, by saying we laid the groundwork for the intent back in 2024 with our board. And we were laying that intent even before that. When I was recruiting our executive team, everyone who joined our team before 2024 knew our North Star was this strategy, that they were coming on board and they had to check their egos because ultimately we're building something much larger, right? So the question can be answered many different ways. The intent, getting our board there 2024 and building out the strategic plan, that was a year. And then that allowed me and gave me the opportunity to reach out to other leaders in the industry and just beg the question, be curious about it. Now, I'll be very clear, most of the folks I knocked on doors with, I already saw a path. I already thought there was some opportunity. And with Main Street, they had undergone an executive leadership change. I saw an opportunity for staffing synergy. One of their board members, Rohan Kalbag, who's been such an amazing partner to us, had stepped into that leadership void and has been CEO since since 2024. And so, knocking on his door and just getting a sense from him really helped start the conversation, and his vantage point and him seeing what the sustainability and what the concerns of Main Street have been allowed them to come to the table in early 2025. And so here we are. We just announced it in March 2026.
Thank you. Let me, Doug, let me turn to you and draw on your experience in corporate M&A, which is how in corporate M&A is the board engaged? I mean, is this something that, again, you have sort of soft conversations about for a long time and what you're going to do, and then suddenly it gets real? And I'm going to ask, how is that different from what you've seen in nonprofit governance? So everybody on this call, how should they be thinking about working with the board?
So if you're the target, the board is going to, over a period of time, conclude, that there's not enough runway to go independently. Either they're too small, they don't have a good candidate to be the successor CEO, they're undercapitalized, the competition's, there's some reason that's driving it. You don't just,
right.
Or if you're a private equity owned company, you just look at the clock and after 36 months, the boss comes and puts you on the market. So it's just part of the routine there. On the buy side, the considerations I mentioned when I was doing the deck, organic growth is hard. Organic R&D is hard and expensive. Entering new markets, particularly offshore, is difficult. So I think every company, past a certain size or, past, if you're just living hand to mouth, you don't do this. But if you're looking to the future and to growth, you're thinking about M&A and you're identifying with management, here's what we want to get. We want to be here. We don't want to be here. We want this technology, not that technology. And you hire advisors and investment bankers and consultants, and you task your management to go and run the traps. And they're always looking. And if you're, a for-profit company of any size, you're getting calls every week from people who want to sell you something. And most of the time, it's not anything you want to buy, but there are always people out there trying to sell you something. In the not-for-profit world, for the reasons that I said, the board tends to be less engaged. That's not true across the board, but it tends to be that, somebody's doing this because they want to help the community, but they don't want to spend a lot of time on it. They don't want to make hard or controversial decisions. They'll just defer to management. Management tends to not want to be taken over because that tends to have an impact on staffing, including the CEO staffing. So there's usually some, as I said, some action of necessity that in 6 out of 10 cases, it's like, oh no, we're running out of money. We better do something. It's a visionary board and a visionary CEO that gets out in front and says, we're doing fine, but I can see down the road we would do better. We would be more aligned with the mission if we could, do this, get into this new market, this new technology, this whatever. So that's the difference. And one that's every single meeting, there's a couple times a year, you're focusing on M&A.
That's it. That's interesting. So Sara and Marla, any quick reactions to that from your experience working in the CDFI world? Does that ring true? Does that fundamentally sound right, or does it differ in some way?
No, that slide about growth strategies, if those are the organic growth strategies, and the highest return is merger and acquisition. It's every Harvard Business School case study talks about this. So yeah, it's just a matter of knowing it at the nonprofit space. And I just say, to Doug's point, nonprofits don't get knocks on the door for buying, but boy, do we get knocks on the door for partnering. And there's a lot of let's partner, which is expensive. It does meet a need, and in that build, buy, or partner structure, partnering meets an immediate need. If you don't have the capacity to do something, you lean on a partner, but it limits your control over what the process is. So you're foregoing, you're trading time for control, and that's fine, and you'll figure it out, and that's what takes a lot of planning. But there is that balance of nonprofits tend to be in the partner knocking on doors, and for-profits tend to get a lot of buy requests.
Fascinating. Marla?
I would only push back on the board involvement. I think, every organization is different. It sounds like Sara's board was very engaged. I know if and when NALCAB takes this on, our board is extremely engaged. So I can't imagine it being sort of a more like having to draw them in more to focus on something like this, which I know is a luxury, and I'm happy to have that be the scenario. I also think whoever's being absorbed, their board tends to be extremely engaged, because it's sort of this fear of loss that is kind of a thread throughout the chat and throughout our conversation. Sort of what is my significance now if the organization that I'm on the board of no longer exists? Will I have any role moving forward? I do feel, maybe it's just human nature, but that seems to be the driver, in addition to, of course, the sort of more salient issue of sustaining the organization. But there is, the E word, the ego, that comes into play, where people sort of feel like, well, again, what does this mean for me? If you're an employee, if you're a board member, if you're the CEO.
Let me just
go ahead.
Thing quickly. What I was talking about is not sort of when you're in a process, but when on a clear day when there's no transaction on the horizon.
Absolutely agree.
If you're a public company, and I've heard it said many times in the boardroom, someone will say, well, this company is always for sale. It just depends on the price. And the directors are always going to be thinking about that and receptive to it, not to a particular transaction, but they understand that issue. In the not-for-profit world, in my experience, if management's not thinking about a transaction, it's unlikely that the absence of exigency, the board is unlikely to be driving it. was the only point I was making.
No, I
Super.
appreciate that clarification, Doug. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I don't think that it's part of most board conversations unless it's right in front of our faces. So
Right.
you're absolutely right.
It's a great insight and always for sale versus most CDFIs would say we're never for sale. You can't
Right.
buy it, right? So it's a really interesting thing. So this session is called the Future of CDFIs, and 150 people have stayed with us so far and still want to hear about the future of CDFIs. So this is look into your crystal ball or put on your your however you see into the future. Doug had a slide that I found really compelling about why CDFIs are particularly interesting from an M&A perspective. And I thought it was really compelling. And I thought, geez, yeah. And then, a few comments. There's generational change going on in our industry. There's a lot of nervousness around the CDFI fund and who's going to be able to, folks who unfortunately are relying on the CDFI fund for over too much operating support and, all this uncertainty. The world's changing, capital's getting more expensive, all those things. What are the major drivers? And when you put on your hat, is this going to be are we going to see a lot more activity in this? Is it going to trickle and then turn into a bigger stream? What do you think? You can look as far forward as you want. So
Yeah, if I could jump in, I think there's been a bifurcation of the industry for some time now, where some of the larger, more established continue to be able to access resources, and some of the smaller, earlier stage are going, unless they are really thinking proactively, are going to be just on a hamster wheel and continuing to try to stay relevant, stay responsive. And so that's naturally happening just by the resource allocation, just by the skill allocation. And I just imagine that there will be further segmentation of those who choose this path and those who choose no path or another path. My hope simply is that this is really recognized as a time to be proactive. Whatever your consideration, and in that chart for the collaboration map, you have multiple options, but business as usual has changed for the entire world, let alone for this industry. So think through what the future could be, how you could, as I've heard, future-proof your organization, because it shouldn't be running on sweat equity alone. It shouldn't be running on a wing and a prayer that one fund will come through. And for many CDFIs, that's been federal dollars. And suddenly there's a panic that those federal dollars aren't going to be there. That's been happening. We were undercapitalized for some time. It's just more blatant now. So anyway, I think there's been bifurcation. I think there's going to be segmentation, and there's not a perfect answer, but I hope people are thinking about it and proactive.
So you're hoping that there is more proactive effort to do this. Great, thanks, Marla.
I would double click on Sara's point. I do think initially these conversations started happening more and more as a parachute for organizations that, because of shifts in not only the federal funding landscape, but the entire philanthropic landscape, found themselves in a position of sort of, what are we going to do? We've got a 6-month operating budget left to go, if something doesn't hit, to Sara's point. So I think that sort of drove some interest in this. And I think like some of the earlier conversations, maybe last year, that were kind of like, we got to sort of start doing this now because people need it. But I do think what it ended up doing was spurring this idea of looking at it as a proactive and a growth strategy. And so I am hopeful that people start using this. And I actually think it will sort of be like have a snowball effect, in the sense that the more organizations that do it, the more we'll feel comfortable with the idea, and it will sort of be socialized within our industry.
Fascinating. Doug, what's your perspective?
I would like to say that these conversations, Mark, that you're spearheading will trigger an understanding of the issue and drive consolidation. And my dream is that some entrepreneur will decide to take their dollars, instead of trying to go to the Mars or Venus, spend them here and push for consolidation in this industry, which would make us much more effective, I think, across the board. But honestly, I don't have a solution to what Marla referred to as the ego problem. And as long as you have people who are lovely, socially conscious, community-minded people saying, this won't work if I lose my job. They're going to try, fight hard to not lose their jobs. And that, to me, it's clear, as anyone who doesn't know what I've said here, that to me is the biggest stumbling block here.
Thank
and
you.
we don't, and the industry doesn't have the money to give those people a golden parachute maybe the entrepreneur I referred to would, but that seems to me to be a roadblock that we have to get around.
Thank you. So on that, I'm going to draw us to a close. And first, I want to thank our three speakers, Marla, Doug, Sara. You were awesome. You did a great job of sharing a tremendous amount of information, and I think really have advanced the conversation. So thank you for that. And last of all, before we let you go at the bottom of the hour, the half hour, our next event will be on April 8th is AI for CDFIs. There are a lot of CDFIs wrestling with AI right now. We're going to have a conversation. We'll announce the speakers in about a week. And we hope you'll join us there.